I'm Sheena, and this is Unusual Hobbies, a short podcast series where we talk to people about hobbies that are different and unique. Today I'm joined by Emily Engberts, who is doing one of the most unique hobbies I've heard of. And I suppose this makes me an old fart because I think this is gaining popularity, if I'm not mistaken. But Emily, thank you for joining me today. We're talking about
wargaming, or miniature wargaming.
Right, miniature wargaming. Explain to us what this is.
Basic idea is that you have two armies or more armies that fight against each other, but instead of doing it on the battlefield or on a computer screen, you actually play it on a tabletop platform thing. It's a very intense hobby because generally you have to buy, then paint, well, buy and then put together, then paint, and then you can play with them. So
okay, so let's take 2 steps backwards. So this is a tabletop game, and by that you mean there's like a map or something on the table?
yeah, you can either play it on a map or some people actually make their own boards. They are wooden or plastic squares, almost tables by themselves, but they'll have hills and trees and all sorts of other cool things on them. So that's what you play on.
So it's like a miniature landscape?
Yeah.
Okay, and then you get...
where you battle with miniature creatures.
Right, so then you get these tiny figurines, which you buy, assemble, and paint.
Yes.
Okay, and these miniature figurines tend to be what kind of creatures?
There are a lot of different brands that do these, and they come in a lot of different types. I only play Games Workshop games at the moment, which has a lot of different races that you can play. In the fantasy or the Age of Sigmar side, it's what you would expect from most fantasy books. So you've got your orcs, your dwarves, your elves, your dark elves. You've got chaos creatures coming from like the void, and they can look really horrible. So you get all those on the fantasy side, and then the science fiction. You've got your space marines. You've got your elves, but space elves, and all sort of creatures that are flying around on spaceships and shooting laser guns and that kind of stuff on the other side. And
okay,
yeah, so basically anything you'd find in a fantasy or in a science fiction book would come on the table.
And can you mix them?
You can't mix most of them with it between fantasy and science fiction, but there are some races that are just, well, they're chaos. Like it doesn't matter if they're fantasy chaos or if they're science fiction chaos. They're just creepy creatures generally.
Okay, so how do you win?
By defeating the other person, usually.
But how? Like, how does the actual game go? So do you throw dice to see who hits or misses?
Start of the game, you put your armies on the table, then you start moving your army forward, and if you can shoot or otherwise fight someone else, then you roll your dice to see if something hits and how much damage they do, and if they actually shoot. Sometimes you also have to roll the dice first to actually know if they shoot. So sometimes they shoot, but they don't actually shoot anything. They can misfire. It can be very frustrating.
Okay. How long on average does one of these games take?
Depending on how many points your army is, it can take anywhere from an hour to 3 hours. Something like that. I think the fastest game I've played is an hour.
So I'm guessing a lot of strategy goes into building the army and deciding what you're going to have.
Yeah, that or this looks good, that looks good, I want that, that looks good, and this looks good. It also works.
And is there like a limit to how many people or points or something you can have in an army?
Usually you decide, before you start playing, you decide how many points the army can be worth. Most common within Warhammer is either 1,000 points or 2,000 points. Something like that is basically what you play.
And how many figurines would that be?
That really depends on what army you play. I have an army that is, let me count, I think I've got 1,300 points or something like that, 1,500 points, and it's over 50 different models.
Okay.
But I also know people who have a 2,000 point army that are only 8 models.
Okay.
Really strong models, but they only have very few of them.
So it's very strategic as to what you want to play and how you play it. Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
And then there's also the element of luck with the dice.
Yeah, there's a lot of dice rolling. It's even so bad that some people will throw their dice away if they keep rolling too poorly. There's a real dice superstition going on in it.
Oh, why?
Well, if your dice don't roll very well, then you keep dying, or you keep not killing the other person. So
Right. And what dice are you using?
most of it is just six-sided dice.
Okay.
They don't have very many different. Of course, you get all the pretty ones, but in general, you just use six-sided dice.
So if somebody decides that this sounds like the right kind of thing for them, what would you recommend that they do now?
I'd recommend trying to find the nearest Games Workshop or Warhammer store, because I think they're rebranding most of them to Warhammer stores these days. And go inside and ask the manager there what the best idea is for them. They usually have starter boxes which have a couple of models, but from two different armies, so you can start like playing together with someone else, or you can just start buy a box of one army and build for yourself, and then go play in either a local gaming community or in the stores themselves.
So how did you get started with this?
I sort of fell into it. I've had a couple of exes who either painted a lot or who played. After a while, I also sort of started having interest in painting them because it's a very quiet hobby. Like you sit down with your paints and some music or whatever, and you just start painting. So it's a very soothing, quiet hobby to do that side of it. And I really like that. And being able to be creative, which then, of course, bit me in the ass as I was growing my army, but it started out fun. I've been painting since I think 2006, but I only played my first game last year. So that's 12 years where I've only painted and never played a game.
And now you're hooked on the playing.
I love playing, yeah, but I also still really like the painting side, but I'm very easily distracted, so I only tend to do it for like a couple of months, weeks or months at a time that I paint. It's why I never really got that far with my army very quickly. That's why it took me so long. But to even have enough models to be able to play, yeah, now I've started playing, I really like playing. It just took me a while to get there.
What appeals to you most about this hobby?
I think the quiet time and my own creativity I can put into it. But also, I've met some really cool people these days. I often spend an afternoon in the week actually going to my local store and paint there. So it's also got really a social community part to it for me. And as an author, I just spend so much time on my own that having that social element really makes it fun.
I can absolutely see that. If you're not into going out to parties or being overtly sort of social with others, I can see how something like this would be a really great way to meet people of similar interests who are also not necessarily outgoing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
You're listening to The Lesbian Talk Show. TheLesbianTalkShow.com, your hub of podcast information. Okay, cool. So, do you have any other interesting facts or stories that you want to share about it?
I play for fantasy, or Age of Sigmar it's called these days. I actually made, I'd like to say, a mistake. I paint my army. I've played Dark Elves in fire colors. So they are like, everyone is like, if you're, they paint it like flames. So yellow, red, orange, like flamey models. The only downside is it takes me to paint 10 models. It takes me probably 8 hours, and that's just the most simple, getting the skin on and getting like a couple of details in. To get it really detailed, by then I'm usually bored, so I don't tend to go very detailed because I get easily bored of doing the same thing over and over. It's sometimes a bit complicated on the getting everything done side and painting them. People really love them. So I'm like, on the one hand, like people love them, and when I actually play with them, it looks really impressive, but I don't always like the painting side of it. So when I started playing science fiction, I actually so Warhammer 40k it's called, I actually started painting according to the normal color scheme for the army, just to have something much more relaxing to paint and just know that I can look it up online if I need to know a color of like the skin of this model. What layers do I need? What layers of paint do I need to put on this? I can just look it up and it's so much faster. But then I still love doing the fire color things, especially if models have wings, like making really big fire wings on them. Looks really cool, but it's so much work.
So where can we see pictures of your amazing models? Have you got them up anywhere?
Yeah, they're on my Instagram and on my Twitter. I often post them. You can usually find them there.
What's the addresses for those?
On Instagram, you can find me as Easily Distracted Media, and on Twitter as Emily Engberts.
Okay, cool.
So just my regular social media. I don't have a special social media account for it. It's right with my cats and my writing related things. It's all in the same place. I know branding wise, it's not the best, but I can't be bothered to have too many different things to take care of. So it's all in the same place.
Well, that's completely understandable considering how many books you've written and how much writing you've done. So let's transition to that. Let's talk about what is the latest book that you've just published?
The one I just published, A Blooming Spring Love.
And this is the third one in the series?
It's the third one in the series, yes.
And are you going to end it there? Is it just going to be a 3-book series?
No, I've got at least ideas for one more, and then I'm having to focus on 2 of my young adult titles for a couple of weeks to get those published, because those I release serial, so 2 chapters a week, but by then they need to get ready for publication. They'll be finished and they need to be ready for publication. And after that, I'm hoping to get back to the series.
How are you releasing the 2 chapters a week? What platform?
On Tapas and on Wattpad, and my other one is a lit RPG, which is a science fiction book. So that one is on Royal Road. Lots of places, yes.
You're very diversely all over the place.
I am. The first one, Second Chance at Christmas, is also currently being released on Radish with 2 chapters a week. But that's a book that's already out, but is now also being published on Radish because they invited me to publish on their platform a couple of weeks ago.
And are you seeing results from it?
Not much, but one, it's a Christmas title. It's not really the right time to release a Christmas title, but I just wanted something to put up to test everything out. But I do like it because I like releasing a serial, and most of my work is, even though I write a novel, even when I actually sit down and write a novel in one go, I write serial chapter-wise anyway. So putting them up on something like Reddish or Wattpad or anything like that doesn't change anything for me because it's how I write anyway.
So if somebody was new to your work, what should they start with?
If they love really cute lesbian couples, start with Second Chance at Christmas, which is just the first one in my adult lesbian romance. If they like young adult books with a lot of queer people and that talk about neurodiversity, start with Her Elysium, which is the first one in Flowers and Keyboards, which is all about queer young adults and a lot of neurodiversity. The first book has 2 ADHD girls who are both gamers, which is how they meet. And if they're not so much into the romance, but more into the sci-fi, I've also got Base Status Online, which is a sci-fi book, has a lot of LGBT and neurodiverse characters in it. Not all of them are, you're not all aware of all of them in the first book, but it does get clearer later on in the second book, which I'm working on right now.
Okay, cool. And where can people follow you online?
Follow me on Facebook on the Easily Distracted Media Facebook page. On Twitter, it's Emily Engberts on Twitter. Yeah, just Emily Engberts. And Instagram, Easily Distracted Media. And my website, also easilydistractedmedia.com. And there's a link to the newsletter there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, sure.
And for sharing your love of war games, miniature war games.
Thank you for having me, though.
You've been listening to Unusual Hobbies. Check out the links in the show notes for more information about my guest and to find our link to Patreon, where you can get exclusive podcasts and help us grow. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please rate us, especially if you listen on Apple Podcasts. That's all for this episode. Have a hobbylicious day.